I want to share with all of you a very important lesson that I learned from my grandfather when I was 12 years old. I think it's very important because it shows us how much violence we are committing today. Violence has been growing everywhere in the world, and unless we do something to change this, we are not going to be existing in this world anymore. Civilizations in the past have fallen, have been destroyed, and this civilization also is going in the same direction of destruction. And it can be reversed. This is what my grandfather taught us when he discovered the philosophy of nonviolence more than 100 years ago. He practiced it and he showed us how we can resolve our conflicts through peaceful means. But the lesson that I want to share with you today is a lesson that came about because of a little pencil. I was coming back from school. I was 12 years old. I had this little pencil in my hand. It was about 3 inches long. And I thought I deserved a better pencil. This is too small for me to use. And without a second thought, I just threw the pencil away because I was so sure that grandfather would give me a new one when I asked him for it. But that evening when I met grandfather and asked him for a pencil, instead of giving me one, he subjected me to a lot of questions. He wanted to know how the pencil became small, where did I throw it away, why did I throw it away, and on and on. And I couldn't understand why he was making such a fuss over a little pencil until he told me to go out and look for it. And I said, "You must be joking." He said, "You don't expect me to go out in the dark and look for the pencil?" He said, "Oh, yes, I do. Here's a flashlight." And he sent me with a flashlight to look for this pencil, and I must have searched for about 2 hours. And when I finally found the pencil and brought it to him, he said, "Now I want you to sit here and learn 2 very important lessons." The first lesson is that even in the making of a simple thing like a pencil, we use a lot of the world's natural resources. And when we throw them away, we are throwing away the world's natural resources. And that is violence against nature. And the second lesson is that because in an affluent society we can afford to buy all these things in bulk, we overconsume the resources of the world. And because we overconsume them, we are depriving people elsewhere of these resources, and they have to live in poverty. And that is violence against humanity. And that was the first time I realized that all of these little things that we do every day, consciously and unconsciously, things that we overconsume and throw away because we have so much of it and we can afford to throw it away, that all of that adds up to the violence that we are experiencing today in the world. This is what is causing the disparities between people. Not only the economic disparity, but eventually it leads to social, cultural, religious, all of the disparities that we are experiencing today, and which is giving birth to hate and prejudice. To make me understand this lesson thoroughly, he made me draw a genealogical tree of violence. Just as we do a family tree with violence as the grandparent and physical violence and passive violence as the 2 branches. And every day before I went to bed, I had to analyze and examine everything that I had experienced during the day. I had to find out my own weaknesses and put them down on that tree. Now, if it's the kind of violence where physical force is used, that would go under physical violence. But if it's the kind of things that we do every day, where we don't use any physical force, sometimes we don't even see the other person, and yet our actions and inactions hurt somebody somewhere, that would go under passive violence. The way I had to find out whether this is passive violence or not was to ask myself the question, if somebody were to do this to me, would I be hurt by it or would I be helped by it? And if I came to the conclusion that it would help me, then that would be passive violence. And when I began to do this introspection, I was amazed that within a few months I was able to fill up a whole wall in my room with acts of passive violence. The physical violence didn't grow very much because there's a limit to what you can do physically to people. But passive violence is something that we don't even know and we don't even understand that we are committing this. And that is when I filled up the whole wall and I was so amazed that I could commit so much passive violence, or that the world could commit so much passive violence. That is when grandfather explained to me the connection between the two. He said, we commit passive violence all the time, every day, consciously and unconsciously. And that generates anger in the victim. And the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. Because that's what justice has come to mean today. We need revenge. We need somebody must be made to pay for what they have done to us. So justice is revenge. And that is what happens when people are victims of violence, passive violence. They seek justice through revenge. And this is where he said that we need to understand how passive violence is leading to physical violence in the world. He emphasized the fact that because of all the violence that we are facing today, that our relationships with each other are very poor. The foundation of his philosophy of nonviolence is based on the four principles of respect, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation. It's on these pillars that the philosophy of nonviolence is born, and it's on these pillars that our relationships with each other should be based. We need to respect ourselves and respect each other and respect our connection with all of creation. We think that we are independent individuals and we can do whatever we like and it's nobody's business. We are not independent individuals. We are interrelated, interconnected, and we need to understand that and behave in that manner. It's only when we respect ourselves and respect all of creation that we will understand who we are and what we are and why are we are here on earth. We are not here by accident. We are not here to pass the time from birth to death or from morning to evening, just doing our routine work and not be concerned about what is going on in the rest of the world. So we are all interconnected individually, collectively, and with nature. And it's only when we understand that we will accept each other as human beings. Today we classify people by various classifications, religious classifications, social classifications, cultural, race. We have so many different classifications of people that every time we put a label on that person and we build a wall between that person and ourselves. And every time we build a wall between people, we are building the potential for conflict. We need to understand that we are all here and we are all equal. Whatever our color, whatever our religion, whatever our philosophy, wherever we come from, we are all equal, we are all one. And it's only when we are able to accept that we will appreciate our own humanity. So these are the principles on which he based his philosophy on nonviolence and tried to create a society where we can all accept each other and live happily and with harmony. Peace cannot be achieved by just the absence of war. Peace can be achieved only when we create that harmony between people where we live with love and respect for each other. And that is something that all of us can create. Civilization today does not mean just having a lot of money and having a lot of power. Civilization means how do we relate to each other? How do we relate to nature and all of other creation? That determines how civilized we are. So we need to understand that and try to practice that. I want to share with you one final story before I end. It's a story that my grandfather used to be very fond of telling us when we were growing up. A story of an ancient Indian king who once became very curious about the meaning of peace. And he invited all the intellectuals in his kingdom to come and explain the meaning of peace. And everybody did their best, but nobody could really satisfy the king. And one day, an intellectual from another town came on a visit, and the king asked him the meaning of peace. And he said, the only person who can give you a satisfactory answer is an old sage who lives outside your kingdom. But he is so old that he cannot come to you. You will have to go to him and ask him this question. So the next day, the king went to the sage and asked him the meaning of peace. And the sage quietly went to the back of the house, came back with a grain of wheat, and placed that grain of wheat on the king's palm and said, here is your answer. And of course, the king didn't know what a grain of wheat had to do with peace. And he didn't want to show his ignorance. So he quietly clutched that grain of wheat, went back to his palace, found a little gold box and placed that grain of wheat in the box. And every morning he would open the box to look for an answer, and he couldn't find any answer. So a few days later, when this intellectual came back on a return visit, the king asked him to explain. He said, "You sent me to this sage and he gave me this grain of wheat, and I don't know what a grain of wheat has to do with peace." And that's when the intellectual said, "It's very simple." He said, "As long as you keep this grain of wheat in this box, nothing is going to happen. It will eventually rot and perish, and that would be the end of the story. But if you had allowed this grain of wheat to interact with all the elements, if you had planted it outside in the soil, it would sprout and grow, and very soon you could have a whole field of wheat." And that is the meaning of peace. That if somebody has found peace and if they keep it locked up in their hearts for their own personal gains, it will perish with them. But if they let it interact with all the elements, it would grow, and very soon we could have a whole world of peacemakers. So I have come here today to give you the grain of wheat that I got from my grandfather. And I hope that you all won't let it perish, but let it interact so that all of us together can make this world a better place for future generations. Thank you.